Hello, I'm Elaine, and I'm a tour guide in the French Quarter. I do ghost tours, and I am not going to tell you the stories that I tell on my tour because you got to pay for those. But if you want to hear some interesting things that have happened to me while I'm leading random drunk people around the French Quarter, I got you. So I told you about Shirtless Shane. Let me tell you about another one of the French Quarter figures that I know better than I want to know. So there is a guy that I think of as a gutter punk, which if you do not know, gutter punk is one of those terms that the people who it applies to do not particularly like it. I think it's a great term, like gutter punk, cool! But they do not appreciate it, and mainly because there's a stigma attached to it because the term got used a lot in the 90s, and some of the gutter punks in the 90s were known for being violent, for being druggies, for just not being good people. And like, depending on who you ask to this day, a lot of gutter punks aren't good people. I think most of them are harmless. Yeah, they do more drugs than they probably should. Yeah, they don't bathe that often. But as long as you're not smelling them, they tend to be nice people. But there was one gutter punk that I did not like. Now, I referred to him personally by the nickname Peter Pan for one specific reason. There was one week that he interrupted the first stop of my tour 3 times in a row. And the first 2 interruptions were the more common ones. They're the things that happen on a regular basis. He'd come up and ask for a cigarette, and when I told him no, we're in the middle of a stop, he'd just scream things like, "Oh, you don't know this city! Get out of here! Get out of here! You don't know anything about New Orleans!" That sort of thing. But his final time, the one that earned him his nickname, he came up and planted himself right between me and my guests, facing my guests, and he was a lot taller than me, so this was very disruptive. And immediately starts looking at my guests going, "Oh, she don't know shit. She don't know shit. I know the real stuff. I can tell you the truth. I can tell you the truth about Peter Pan." And of course, I interrupt him to be like, "Honey, they're not here to hear about Peter Pan. They're here to hear about the history of New Orleans." He's like, "Well, I know history." And at that point, I'm like, "Guys, this isn't working. Just follow me." And I lead us away. And he continued screaming down the street as we walked away, "I know the truth about Peter Pan!" But people screaming at us on the side of the road is pretty common, and specifically the street kids and the gutter punks like to scream at us a lot because they do know a side of New Orleans that I don't know, and I will never claim that I know more about that side of New Orleans than they do. The problem is, that ain't the side of New Orleans people are willing to pay to hear about. There was one very memorable night where I was in the middle of a story and a gutter punk came up and interrupted to be like, "Oh, she don't know shit about New Orleans. I know about the real New Orleans. Pay me $50 and I'll take you on a tour of the real New Orleans." I'm like, "That is a lot more expensive than my tour, but thanks." And finally, when I was like, "Sweetie, I'm in the middle of a story. You need to move on," his response was to look at me and say, "I bet you don't even know where there's a liquor store." And I point across the street and go, "Right there." And he turns and walks into the liquor store. So, moral of the story? Always know where there's a liquor store? Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you for listening.